Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 4 running back starter sets for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be going over news around the National Football League, then the matchups at the running back position going into Week 4, and then the long-awaited top 36 rankings at the RB position. Before we begin today's video, let me remind all of you, if you haven't yet already, click that subscribe button. And let me thank all of you who have joined the community and helped us get to the 9,000 subscriber mark. It is absolutely incredible. I can't thank you guys enough. For those of you who haven't yet already, click that like button down below. Join the community by clicking the subscribe button and click that bell notification button to get notified with my latest content coming out and when I'm live streaming to stay up to date on all your fantasy football news. All right, so, hey guys, how's it going? Really quickly, for the 9,000 subscribers, it's incredible. Obviously, 10,000 is just down the road, but tomorrow I'm going to be having a big announcement for the 9,000 subscriber mark. So on Wide Receiver Wednesday for the start and sit, hopefully you can come out and watch that big announcement for some stuff that I'm going to be doing for the community. But either way, let's talk about Week 4 running back position. The only piece of information that I thought was really relevant in terms of fantasy football and the National Football League that I thought I'd bring up because obviously we haven't seen whether or not people are practicing thus far this week, the injury question marks that are sitting around the Chiefs backfield and perhaps Devin Singletary and all that kind of noise. So we're waiting on that. But C.J. Anderson, who was recently cut from the Detroit Lions, is working out for the Houston Texans today. Now, is that a big piece of information? It's pretty relevant to the top 36 rankings because if a guy like C.J. Anderson can join that backfield, it definitely hurts the potential of Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson going into the future. Duke Johnson, who hasn't really shown up since Week 1. Carlos Hyde, who's been getting an ample amount of carries, but hasn't been able to deliver on them. It's kind of making Lamar Miller look like a better running back. Am I right? But either way, that was a pretty juicy bit of information. If he ends up being signed by this team, then there's some potential for some adjustment. But either way, that's pretty much it. I mean, in terms of injuries, we're just waiting. We're waiting. Oh, other piece of information. Cam Newton will be missing this week. Kyle Allen has been named the starter. According to the source that I read, Cam Newton, as of right now, is dealing with a Liz Frank injury with his foot. And typically that is going to take a little while to rehab and get back from. In that meantime, there is a possibility that Kyle Allen can string together some W's. This was the first time the Panthers had won in 11 weeks. Imagine that, going back to last season. So Kyle Allen has really helped this organization. If he can really beat the Texans this coming week, it only helps his case moving forward. But anyway, let's talk about running backs. Let's talk about Week 4, and let's talk about the matchups at the position. Let's go check that out, shall we? All right, guys, so here's the deal. Obviously, the Miami Dolphins are the worst team against the run. Somehow, Tony Pollard had 100 rushing yards along with Ezekiel Elliott's 100 rushing yards last week. They are the best offensive line in the National Football League. The Dolphins are the worst team in the league thus far, but they were still competitive early on in that game with a couple of drives with Josh Rosen. So there's always a potential. Preston Williams, guys, I'm telling you, moving up, a little bit there. But the easiest matchups of the week, the Dolphins, certainly, the Cincinnati Bengals. That is a huge plus for James Conner owners going into this week. Yes, you haven't been able to trust them thus far, but in this matchup, we just saw Frank Gore rip off for 15 fantasy points last week. The week before that, we saw Breida go for 100 yards. We saw Mostert go for 10-plus fantasy points. We saw Jeff Wilson Jr. go for 10-plus fantasy points. James Conner, this is your week. I know you've been, have that nagging knee injury, but this is your week. Moving on, the Green Bay Packers giving up a lot of points to the running back position. Is Jordan Howard or Miles Sanders, Darren Sproles, that RBBC committee? Is Miles Sanders going to break out from that? He's been making baby steps, but hopefully this is, he's got another opportunity at it. The Steelers don't really play well against the running back position. Joe Mixon finally joined us in 2019 last week. The Indianapolis Colts struggling. What else? The Lions, the Broncos, the Rams, the Chiefs, and the Jets. The Jets are on a bye week along with the 49ers this week. So for those of you who are wondering, those guys will not be on this list because of that today. But in terms of the easiest matchups, these aren't, too out of the ordinary. These teams have been trending in this direction thus far this season. There isn't really much of a difference here from last week in terms of points getting given up to opposing running backs thus far. So again, these are the solidified, solid first 3 weeks of of production in terms of how many points they give up to opposing running backs. Now, teams that have been really stout against the running back position, the Jaguars at 23, the Titans at 24, Vikings at 25. That right there already hurts a couple names that we want to already talk about today. Phillip Lindsay has to go against the Jaguars defense. On top of that, the Tennessee Titans get their hands on Devonta Freeman, who, yes, may have had a double-digit fantasy point week last week, but has struggled mightily this season and has to play against a very good run-stopping defense. The Minnesota Vikings get their hands all over David Montgomery in that backfield, who hasn't been given enough touches. The Baltimore Ravens play against Nick Chubb. Can they stop him? The Saints, they get Zeke. The Eagles, they get to go against Aaron Jones. The Bears, they go against Dalvin Cook. The 49ers, bye week. The Patriots get to lock down whoever's in that Bills backfield. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers get the Gurley experiment that sits back there in LA. A lot of good running backs into tough matchups. That's all we have to see. I know, okay, let's think about the Tampa Bay situation. How are they the best defense against the running back position thus far this season in fantasy football? Okay, in week 1 against the 49ers, the 49ers defense had 27 fantasy points. They did all the scoring in that week, right? Jimmy Garoppolo, he did some stuff. Breida did some stuff. Coleman. But really, there wasn't much running back usage in that game. Okay, big deal next. The following week, on Thursday Night Football, Christian McCaffrey was nowhere to be found. Cam Newton threw the ball 51 times and only threw it to McCaffrey 3 times. So really, he wasn't going to get much usage, there. The following week, against Saquon goes out with an injury. So obviously there's a little bit, I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they might be a little, I don't think it's real. I personally don't think it's real. Now, is Todd Gurley going to be able to take advantage of that? That's a completely different conversation that we're going to have later today, but I wanted to point that out. These are the matchups going into week 3 and how much opposing defenses give running backs on a weekly basis in half PPR scoring formats. Okay, let's go ahead. Let's get to my top 36 running back rankings on the week. Rankings are subject to change. Always remember that, guys. Again, this is a Tuesday. By Saturday, everything can change. By Sunday morning, everything can change. James White didn't play. All of a sudden, we heard Darrel Williams was going to be the starting running back, and he came out of nowhere. Rex Burkhead got the boost because James White disappeared. There's always a fluid motion of these rankings. They can change at any minute. If I sneeze the wrong way, Derrick Henry can go to number 1 somehow, But Derrick Henry is on the thumbnail for a reason. We'll get to that. Let's talk about my number one running back going into week 4 of the 2019 fantasy football season. That is Christian McCaffrey. With Kyle Allen last week against the Arizona Cardinals defense, this entire offense looked different. They finally clicked. All of their pieces were working, and nobody was left on the sideline not contributing. DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, Greg Olsen, and Christian McCaffrey and Kyle Allen, all of them played well in this game as a whole. The defense even played well, holding Kyler Murray to a limited amount of points. This coming week, you get to play against the Houston Texans. Yes, they're a pretty decent defense. They're not a defense you're going to be able to run over completely. But Christian McCaffrey, the usage he saw last week, and I think the usage that he's going to continue to see, because he is the best player on this team, and he is the number 1 running back in fantasy, he'll get there. Trust me. That week 2 bluff kind of gave Dalvin Cook a little bit of a head start. But Dalvin Cook gets the Bears this week, so we'll see how that turns out. I think Christian McCaffrey going the rest of the way is my favorite running back rest of the season as of right now. So he is my number 1 on this week in a pretty decent matchup. I'll take him 100%. McCaffrey's number 1. Moving on to number 2, Alvin Kamara. All right, so Alvin Kamara, like I mentioned yesterday, he snuffed my torch. I went up, he said the tribe has spoken, he flipped it, my torch went out, and I got eliminated, or I went to Exile Island. Alvin Kamara dropped 30 fantasy points in a week that I personally thought, you know what, okay, maybe they'll give him the ball a couple of times, maybe they'll have to feed Latavius Murray more. No. Alvin Kamara took over, and hey, I'm happy about it. I don't mind being wrong when Alvin Kamara gets a boost. He's helping my fantasy teams. I'm starting him anyway. Who's not starting Alvin Kamara, right? So going into this coming week against the Dallas Cowboys, last season it was a little bit of a struggle in that matchup late in the season. Alvin Kamara didn't get much usage, but I think going forward into this matchup at home, which is a very big difference maker for this team, it's going to be a pretty favorable matchup in my eyes for Alvin Kamara. We saw, the Dallas Cowboys play down to the Miami Dolphins last week. Can they potentially, as a defense, play up to what Alvin Kamara is capable of doing? We'll just have to wait and see. But either way, my number 2 running back on the week, that's Alvin Kamara, baby. Let's go. Moving on to number 3, Austin Ekeler. Austin Ekeler gets the nod above Ezekiel Elliott and the boys this week because he has a extremely favorable matchup against the Miami Dolphins. He struggled last week against the Houston Texans, but outside of Keenan Allen, really everybody struggled in that offense. So going into this week in a matchup where, again, last week Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard both surpassed the 100 rushing yard mark in the same game against the Miami Dolphins. I think Austin Ekeler and Justin Jackson are both going to be very relevant fantasy options this week. Ekeler certainly because he's the starting running back. Jackson certainly because he gets touches. We'll talk about Jackson in a little bit, but to continue on the point of Austin Ekeler, with no Melvin Gordon in sight, Ekeler is continuing to produce. He's continuing to be fed like the RB1 of this team. And when they get to run the ball heavily and they don't get to, typically when the Chargers have to come from behind, they're not a better team. But when they have the lead and they're putting it on you and they're putting the pedal to the metal, per se, Austin Ekeler is a perfect back, change of pace, and a 3-down guy. He's my number 3 this week. Moving on to number 4, Ezekiel Elliott. Zeke's a monster. He plays against a tough defense. Sure, the New Orleans Saints, they're not great against the wide receiver position. We've seen them be exposed each of the last 3 weeks. Tyler Lockett this past week. The week before, or DeAndre Hopkins in week 1. And in week 2, Brandon Cooks and Cooper Kupp were able to take advantage of that. So there is probably going to be a time where Amari Cooper is going to be tearing apart this defense. Sure. But Ezekiel Elliott is this offense. He is the engine that keeps this thing running. Sure, you can argue that Dak Prescott is taking a little bit of that conversation, but still, Ezekiel Elliott going forward, he has to be a top 4 back every week. He's just that good. Hopefully he doesn't get his end zone touchdowns vultured like it typically happens. Dak Prescott had 1 rushing touchdown this week, which typically happens. It happens 6 times a year. Like I've mentioned before, each of the last 3 seasons, Dak Prescott in the red zone has scored 6 rushing touchdowns each of the last 3 seasons. That's 1. There's 5 more coming, so be ready, Zeke owners. All right, moving on to number 5, Dalvin Cook, playing against the Chicago Bears defense. Chicago Bears looked fantastic last night as a defense. Later in the game, after they, ended up building a 28-point lead, they took, they took their time, right? They didn't really want to go ahead and put in full effort in that second half, even though they were getting after Case Keenum, putting on pressure, making him turn over the ball. They looked great. Against Dalvin Cook, against this new offense of the Vikings, new as in comparatively to last year, they don't want to pass the ball. They want to consistently run the ball, and that is what the Chicago Bears are good against. They're good against stopping the run. So we'll see. Is Dalvin Cook the real deal? Is this offensive line, this offensive scheme, are they capable of beating up one of the best run-stopping defenses in the National Football League? Dalvin Cook has been the fantasy MVP thus far. He is the top running back. He sits at 5 because of the tough matchup. We'll see if he's capable with 20 touches to be able to produce a great fantasy week. And it's only a matter of time until we see how this works out. Moving on to number 6, Derrick Henry. The guy on the thumbnail for a reason. He plays against the Atlanta Falcons defense. Okay, the Atlanta Falcons defense, guys, is not good. Week 1, Dalvin Cook torched him. Week 2, Miles Sanders. I don't want to really do anything on Miles Sanders. Okay, no big deal. Week 3, Marlon Mack. Perfectly fine. Derrick Henry has been given the ball so consistently that Dion Lewis can just be cut at this point. Last week, Dion Lewis got a little bit more snap count percentage because of the fact that they were behind in their games and they had to throw in order to get back into the game. But truly, Derrick Henry had so many runs last week that were called back due to penalties and so many mistakes that he personally made that could have made him a better fantasy play last week, even though he surpassed double-digit fantasy points. There was a screen pass that typically Derrick Henry takes to the house. He bobbled it and dropped it. That was going to go for 40 yards, maybe even longer. But yeah, Derrick Henry this week, my number 6, he could be higher. I love the matchup. I love the amount of usage he's getting, and that's all we ask. If you feed this guy the ball and you feed him a lot, he's going to carry. Moving on, number 7, David Johnson. Looked pretty good in this last week against the Seattle Seahawks. His usage could be more, but I'm happy with it, plain and simple. Going into this coming week, the Cardinals, if I'm not mistaken, they take on the Seahawks. No, wait, yeah. Who did they play last week? They played against the Panthers. Excuse me. That's why I was like, that's where I got mistaken. I was like, wait, what happened here? David Johnson against the Panthers last week was pretty good. He pretty much picked up where Peyton Barber left off in destroying that front seven, which was interesting, right? I would have thought that the Panthers front seven was better than they personally are, considering how much depth they have in that group. But David Johnson's looked good. This offense is beginning to improve more and more. Kyler Murray is taking steps forward every single week. You can see that in his play, and I think that is only going to transition into helping David Johnson become more of a piece of this offense, because if in fact we can get out of those 4 wide sets and feed the ball to David Johnson here a little bit more, I think it might even help Kyler Murray more. But either way, David Johnson, receiving back, a wide receiver to an extent, plays well, has a pretty good matchup this coming week against the Seahawks, because Alvin Kamara did a quick number to them. So I think David Johnson should have a good week. Moving on to number 8. Playing against the second easiest running back schedule pretty much in week 4. I don't know. The wording of that is wrong, but either way. James Conner gets to play against the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Cincinnati Bengals have been destroyed in the last couple of weeks. James Conner has not been great whatsoever, and I think James Conner has a very, very good opportunity this week to right the ship in the correct direction, kind of just pull a 180 on the sucker and turn the season around. He really needs that this week. Thus far, with all of the opportunity he's been given, really hasn't touched the ball enough. 10 rushing attempts is not enough for James Conner. I was mentioning this yesterday during a Patreon live stream that James Conner last season, when he was given 18 plus touches a game, the guy was averaging 20 plus fantasy points per game in half-point PPR scoring formats. We saw last season, the guy touched the ball 36 times in a game, 25 times in a game, 27 times in a game. In 7 different games, he had 18 plus touches, and in those games, he was a monster. Yet they forget about feeding him the ball. Where did this top-tier offensive line go? This is what I'm wondering. Hopefully this week against the Bengals, we can turn that around. For those of you who have Conner, you have to keep him and you have to play him here. For those of you who are looking to buy Conner, buy him before this matchup, because I really do think as soon as this matchup takes place and he runs amok on them on Monday Night Football, there's no more buying James Conner. It's going to be too expensive for your blood. And I think the value of him is just, it's going to be too much. Anyway, moving on to number 9, Marlon Mack. A guy that has been the workhorse of his respective team. A guy that has been extremely consistent in terms of even his routes run is going up. Nyheim Hines gets a little bit touches here and there. Nyheim Hines is not a bad running back to come in for a change in pace, and I really do think Marlon Mack needs that. Considering he was dealing with that calf injury all week long, having another guy come in does not hurt him at all. The guy had, 74 rushing yards and a touchdown this past week in a good matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. This coming week, they have the Raiders. I don't mind this matchup whatsoever. If T.Y. Hilton is out, they'll probably lean towards the running game more. For those of you who don't remember, Marlon Mack had his breakout game last season against the Raiders. He had a ginormous performance because the Colts took an early lead in that game, and T.Y. Hilton, I think, went down or wasn't playing. Marlon Mack took over, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, let me look this up while we're here. It's no big deal. I can do it in about 15 seconds here. Let's go to this site. Let's go to game logs. Let's go to 2018, because I gotta confirm. Against Oakland last year, 25 rushes, 132 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 2 receptions for 17 yards. I'm telling you, Marlon Mack might have a huge week, just like he did last year in those breakout performances. I like him this week in the matchup. He's my number 9. Moving on to number 10, Mark Ingram. Man, Mark Ingram, 3 rushing touchdowns. Lamar Jackson owners, like I mentioned yesterday, it sucks. It's unfortunate. You probably lost the week potentially because of the fact that Mark Ingram was siphoning your points off of your MVP quarterback. But Mark Ingram coming into this coming week, playing against the Browns. I don't think that the Browns are particularly great against stopping the run. I think Gurley wasn't Gurley yesterday or on Sunday Night Football. So Mark Ingram will be able to take advantage of it. I think this offense is 100% predicated on the idea of their offensive line giving a lot of time to Lamar Jackson and their offensive line blowing open lanes for Mark Ingram. So I think with such a consistent offensive line, and we've seen the Cleveland Browns struggle against top-tier offensive lines, there's a chance that Mark Ingram has himself a big game here. He's my number 10. Moving on to number 11, Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb, speaking of the Browns, playing against the Ravens. Listen, Nick Chubb played 97% of offensive snaps last week. He had a lot of work in the passing game, 4 receptions, more than Jarvis Landry's 3 receptions. That's what we want to see. We want to see Nick Chubb be a 3-down back. The way that this offense was ran on Sunday Night Football leads me to believe that when Kareem Hunt comes back, he is going to be used more. When they go in those spread formations, Kareem Hunt is a better receiving option. I'm beginning to worry about that because once Kareem Hunt comes back in week 10, right? Week 10, Nick Chubb might disappear on third downs. So get every ounce of him out of this, give every ounce of fantasy excellence out of him now before Kareem Hunt comes back. Moving on to number 12, Kerryon Johnson. I mentioned it yesterday. 20 rushes for 36 yards, 1.4 yards per carry average. Awful. The Eagles are a great run-stopping defense. There's a reason why we haven't seen Aaron Jones or Jamal Williams on this list thus far, because the Eagles are really good against the run. They always have been. Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, they get after it. Okay, Kerryon Johnson this coming week, a far more favorable matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs, who got Mark Ingram running all over them. I don't think he's going to be having a 3-touchdown game. That's not how this offense works. But I do think Kerryon Johnson's going to have a better week going into week 4. Now, sure, a touchdown saved Kerryon Johnson's week, but I do think he needs to get more usage in the passing game in order to find relevancy. But I think that they're going to get there eventually. I like Kerryon Johnson as my last of my RB1s. Moving on. All right, let's talk about my RB 13 through 24, the RB2s going into week 4. Chris Carson starts off at the top of the list. Chris Carson's a great running back. He fumbles too much, absolutely. That's a given. But Pete Carroll came out and said, we trust in Chris Carson, and we're going to show that. So that means they're going to give him another opportunity. Now, this could all be because Rashad Penny did injure his hamstring and did not play this past week because he injured it during a walkthrough. If, in fact, Penny is not healthy again, they're going to go with Chris Carson. That's for certain. But if Chris Carson fumbles again, we have to remember that Chris Carson was I think he was a 6th-round pick out of Oklahoma State. And they can easily, drop of a hat, cut this guy. If you fumble again, Chris Carson, it's over. Rashad Penny's coming for that job. They spent a 1st-round pick for him. So we're keeping you on a leash. You have a pretty good matchup against the Cardinals. Hopefully you can take advantage of it. Still a great running back, but we got to be careful with him because if he fumbles, he could leave 2 points on our bench just like he did last week. Moving on to number 14, Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon, thank you for joining us in 2019. Glad to see you. We all had you at a top 12 running back, and somehow you finally have shown up after many weeks. Welcome. Get the Pittsburgh Steelers this week, and hopefully you can figure it out. Last week, you really didn't do much in the first half, kind of turned it on in the second half, and I'm glad to see that. Hopefully we can see something similar to that this coming week, considering the scoring is not going to be high against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Hopefully we can see a running game back and forth between you and Connor. I think Mixon hopefully can get back to that 15 points a week that he was last year, just like last week. And that's why I have him at my number 14. Moving on to 15, Josh Jacobs. Didn't look good against the Vikings. That's not a surprise. The Vikings are a great defense. Sure, Aaron Jones the week prior was able to tear him apart, but that was just a fluke. Josh Jacobs was coming off a groin injury, was sick all week long, wasn't used often. John Gruden has said that they want to incorporate him more in the passing game. That's exactly what I want to hear. This is a rookie running back that is capable of being used in the passing game, and is pretty excellent at, I wouldn't say he's better than Jalen Richard right now, but he is a 3-down back, and you need to get him more incorporated within this offense, and I think Jalen Richard needs to take a step back in this offense, and so does DeAndre Washington. So hopefully Josh Jacobs this week into a good matchup against the Colts can figure it out, and I think he's going to. 15. Number 16, Leonard Fournette. Leonard Fournette, prior to that 69-yard run last week, had -8 rushing yards. Did his week completely change after that one run? Absolutely. It's bend but don't break for those Titans defense. They broke, the floodgates opened, and they still caught him. They hawked him down. That being said, Leonard Fournette this coming week plays against the Denver Broncos. I think it's a favorable matchup. I think Leonard Fournette is a good running back. The issue is the offense is not really predicated around running the ball as heavily anymore. He is being used a lot in the passing game, which is a great bonus. It's exactly what we want to see in PPR formats. The more usage, the more routes run, the more opportunity leads to more points. Period. That is the fact. Hopefully Leonard Fournette can turn it around, have another good week of double-digit fantasy points. I don't expect him to have a monster week, but if he does, it's fantastic. He's my number 16. Moving on to 17, LeSean McCoy. Here's the issue about LeSean McCoy. I'm not sure if he's truly healthy. I have put him on this list because I do not think Darrel Williams will be coming back this week. I think that knee injury is more serious than expected. And I think LeSean McCoy will probably play Sunday. Now, if he does play Sunday, chances are he's going to continue to be the starting running back of this team. I think Darrel Williams is a guy that we should take advantage of in terms of picking him up off waivers. But LeSean McCoy is going to be this back that's going to lead the team against the Lions this coming week. And if something changes and he doesn't, perfectly fine. We could put Darrel Williams here. We could put Darrel Williams here. And if they're all out, we could put Darwin Thompson here. I do not care who is the starting running back of the Kansas City Chiefs. It can be C.J. Anderson. Okay, you can go get Justin Forsett from a couple years back, retired. You can go get him. And I promise you he will be relevant in fantasy. Okay, that's all I'm saying. LeSean McCoy is going to be relevant because of the offense that he's associated with. And damn, does he show that he's still got a lot of skill and a lot of gas left in the tank. Hopefully he can get that ankle healthy. Moving on to number 18, Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley has not looked like Todd Gurley in a while. And hopefully the touchdown gets there. If Todd Gurley does not score a touchdown, his fantasy week is irrelevant. He is kind of trending more towards that RB3 flex range at this moment because he doesn't get enough work in the passing game. And quite frankly, Malcolm Brown doesn't get a lot of work either. So really, they're just kind of going away from the running game as a whole. So as of right now, Gurley, you sit at number 18. I do think this is a better matchup than it's perceived to be. And I think you have a pretty decent opportunity to play well. Let's just see if you end up, because Gurley is just running into holes and falling down. There's no burst. There's no, I'm going to cut back and try to make a run here, or I'm going to wait and then nothing. He's just falling down. So right now, you fall down to number 18. Moving on to 19, Phillip Lindsay. Phillip Lindsay gets the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, I think Phillip Lindsay, hopefully, from that performance last week, has ran away from that 50-50 split with Royce Freeman. If, in fact, Phillip Lindsay falls back into that because he doesn't end up having the hot hand this coming week, so be it. That's the curse that he's been, that's the hand that he's been dealt, unfortunately. But Phillip Lindsay, hopefully this coming week, can set himself apart, have himself a good week. That defense does swarm, but I do think that the Tennessee Titans offensive line last week played like complete garbage, and I don't think that the Broncos are going to be that bad. So Phillip Lindsay, whether it's in the passing game, on the ground, can string some things together. He's my number 19. Moving on to 20, Miles Sanders. You get another opportunity, Sanders. Great matchup. You're getting decent usage. In terms of snap counts, I want to talk about this really quickly. Last week, the Philadelphia Eagles, in terms of snap counts, we saw Miles Sanders not even lead the backfield. He had 34%, which took a little bit of a dip from the 2 weeks prior. He started with 48, 43, then 34. So his snaps are going down. Darren Sproles led the backfield with 36, and Jordan Howard had 33%. So really, this is an even split RBBC. That's what it is. Unfortunately, that is the case. In Miles Sanders, he's going to get some work in the passing game. He's going to get work on the ground. But it looks like Jordan Howard is the goal line back, and it looks like Darren Sproles is kind of coming in on third downs. If Miles Sanders wants to end up here in the RB2 conversation, in this matchup against the Packers on Thursday night, he really needs a big run. Is there a possibility of that? Yes. Is he talented enough? Yes. But is he going to be given the opportunity for that? That's the question. It's a little bit of the same deal with David Montgomery at 22. Both of these guys are being thrown into RBBCs and being underutilized, and I can't really get a full sense of what they're going to be able to accomplish, except for they'll be average. They'll be average. And that's why he's at 20. Moving on to 21, Aaron Jones. I don't want to play anybody against the Eagles. I just talked about them 5 minutes ago, saying that the Eagles' front seven will not let you run the ball. Now, Aaron Jones has been, he's been pretty good in the passing game. He can get work there. But Jamal Williams is going to get touches. This Packers offense has been very run heavy. But Aaron Rodgers came out and said, I'm not targeting Devontae Adams and Jimmy Graham enough. They need to see the ball more. Hopefully, we're going to see a shift this week because the Philadelphia Eagles secondary is not good. I know this. The front seven, great. You need to be able to, present some time for Aaron Rodgers, air the ball out to Devontae Adams, air the ball out to Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who's the number 2 wide receiver, and let him go there. I don't think Aaron Jones is going to be fantastic. Therefore, he's my 21. Moving on to 22, David Montgomery. Same situation. Montgomery, he surpasses 10 fantasy points for the second week in a row in half PPR. Yet, what is David Montgomery good for? It's unfortunate. I cannot understand what Matt Nagy's entire scheme was. Why would you draft him so early if you're not going to feature him as the Jordan Howard of this team? Why aren't you going to give him 250 touches this year? He's capable of it, yet you don't want to do it. It's very confusing, and we'll get to the bottom of it eventually, but hopefully David Montgomery against the Vikings this week isn't going to be completely destroyed like his fellow rookie Josh Jacobs. We'll see. It's a tough matchup. That's why he's sitting down here. And his usage, his snap counts, it's not great. Therefore, we got to be weary about this. Moving on, 23, Wayne Gallman Jr. I'm not kidding. Wayne Gallman against the Redskins should be fine. I do think that the Redskins as a whole, defensively, not great. There is a chance that it is going to be a shootout between the two teams. Daniel Jones and Case Keenum both firing it off this coming week. But I do think as a serviceable running back, Wayne Gallman is going to be a presentable fantasy option. The thing is, he's an NFL running back. He's not one of these Saquons that are going to come out of nowhere and just carry the league. But he's going to be serviceable enough that behind this good offensive line, in the passing game, he can work. He's a former Clemson running back that has talent. Sure, he hasn't been able to show it as much thus far, but hopefully he has a pretty big opportunity in the next coming weeks and pretty good matchups. All right, moving on to number 24, Devonta Freeman. Gets to go against the Titans. Good luck, Devonta Freeman. You sit at 24. I didn't even want to put you here, but really everybody below you is kind of on the fringe because we don't know exactly how that's going to turn out. So Freeman, you get to sit at 24, nice and pretty, but I promise you, by Saturday, you're not going to be there because there's going to be something that's going on with injuries that forces you down and forces others up. Let's go ahead and talk about my last 12 running backs this coming week. Darrel Williams at 25. Again, anybody associated with that offense in terms of the backfield, relevant. Darrel Williams, if in fact LeSean McCoy is out, he moves to 17. Darwin Thompson would move to 25. And Damian Williams out, etc. There's going to be two relevant backs out of this backfield against the Detroit Lions. The Lions are not good against the run. They're a decent defense. They have made opposing quarterbacks struggle at times. But I think this Kansas City Chiefs offense is going to light them up. And that's what we're going to see. So I think Darrel Williams at 25 is a perfect spot. 26 is Sony Michel. My issue with Sony Michel is that he's extremely inconsistent. And Rex Burkhead has been playing really well. Sony Michel consistently finds himself in a spot where he is being pulled from the game, not only because of the fact that they are leading heavily, but because he's not playing well. Rex Burkhead, if I'm not mistaken, let me go ahead and find this number. Last week against the Jets, Rex Burkhead, and I quote, played 74% of offensive snaps, while Sony Michel played 22%. 22% of the offensive snaps is literally not even a quarter of the game. Sure, they were able to take the lead early, but Rex Burkhead really stepped up, and I think Sony Michel going forward could end up losing this job. I'm not kidding. He's not playing well. He finds the end zone, sure, but really is not playing well. That's why he sits at 26. Moving on to 27. Listen, hopefully they feed Sony Michel the ball. Hopefully he plays better, but we'll see. 27, Adrian Peterson into a good matchup against the Giants. The Giants can't stop anybody. Defensively, they are very, very, very average, below average. And Adrian Peterson sure hasn't played well this season, but he'll be able to take advantage of something here and put together a pretty good performance. Moving on to 28, Justin Jackson. Similar to the fact that, Justin Jackson in the last 2 weeks has had touchdowns called back because of holding penalties. Yes. If you didn't know that, that's a relevant stat to know. Interestingly enough, they play against the Dolphins in a matchup where it should be extremely one-sided, and Justin Jackson should see a lot of reps. And I think similar to Tony Pollard, Justin Jackson could be a flex option for you this week. A guy that I probably should have mentioned on yesterday's episode because I know a lot of you own him as a handcuff. I thought, maybe he's already rostered because he's rostered in a lot of my leagues. I thought I probably should have mentioned that, and Justin Jackson could be a play this week. 29, Royce Freeman. Still going to get his 10 touches, still going to get some targets out of the backfield, still going to be a relevant running back, could surpass that 10-point fantasy mark. That's always a possibility, but he probably is an 8, 9, 10-point guy in half PPR, and that's why he sits here, because of his opportunity. Moving on to 30, Carlos Hyde. If, CJ Anderson gets signed, this moves around, but as of right now, he gets a lot of touches. They play against the Panthers. The Panthers have been getting, beat up in terms of the running game the last couple weeks with David Johnson and Peyton Barber. Carlos Hyde is still capable running back and has seen a good amount of carries in the last couple weeks. So going forward should be decent. 31, Rex Burkhead, I'm not kidding, is going to eventually take this job if Sony Michel continues to play and meandering around like just an average running back. It's incredible how bad he's played. His yard per carry average in week 1 and week 3 are just it's awful. So going forward, I think Rex Burkhead could be featured more in this backfield. Could see more touches than a Sony Michel on a given week. I wouldn't be surprised. Moving on to number 32, Peyton Barber. The Ronald Jones myth, maybe it's an every other week kind of thing, but Ronald Jones, Peyton Barber, it's a 50-50 shot. I think Peyton Barber is the starting running back of this team. I think he's going to get the majority of the touches and see majority of the snaps. And therefore, I have him at 32, but you never know. Ronald Jones could always figure something out. Moving on to 33, Kenyan Drake. The thing is, this offense didn't look terrible. They weren't great, but they didn't look terrible last week against the Cowboys. They hung in the game for quite some time. And I think this coming week against the Chargers have not been great against stopping the run. Kenyan Drake could put something together. He really could. There's always a possibility of him putting together a couple string of plays throughout the game, even in garbage time, and having himself a game. Moving on to 34, Chris Thompson. In a game between the Giants and the Redskins, which is going to be high scoring in my eyes, very little defensive interference. Chris Thompson is going to be used in the passing game similar to last night. Had over 70 yards receiving. I could see him having something similar to that, but we want him to have more receptions. We want to see him used more in third downs, and I think we'll have that this coming week. Moving on to 35, it's either Frank Gore or Devin Singletary, but I think Frank Gore will probably be the option, considering Devin Singletary is ailing from that hamstring injury that he might not be healthy fully yet. But Frank Gore against the Patriots, not a good matchup. Not at all. But in terms of all the other options, he probably is going to get the most opportunity, so you could throw him out there in hopes that he gets in the end zone, or maybe Frank Gore's just a monster and gets some plays going. Moving on to my last running back, number 36. I really thought about this for a while. I thought I could put Jordan Howard here. I could put, a Sproles, a Ronald Jones here. I could put somebody else, right? There's a lot of names out there that are contributing in, respective backfields. But James White did miss this last week because of the birth of his child. Hopefully, is going to play this coming week. And if he does, I think he'll get a pretty good amount of usage because really, if Sony Michel's not playing well and Rex Burkhead has to run the ball majority of the time, James White is going to be used in the passing game, certainly. And those are my top 36 running backs. I want to thank everybody for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed today's content. Please click that subscribe button. Please click that like button down below if you haven't yet already. Tomorrow, Wide Receiver Wednesday, big announcement tomorrow, so come and check that out. Again, thank you everybody for watching, and until tomorrow, I will see you guys. Have a nice, Tuesday? Put in those waivers and be ready. I'll see you guys. Peace.